Welcome to NovaraLIVE. Tonight, oil prices soar after Israel strikes the world's largest gas field. And I speak to Trita Parsi about Israel's decapitation strategy in Iran. What are they hoping to achieve by one taking out Iran's leadership? And will they achieve it? I'll be joined throughout the show by Bastani. Great to have you in the studio with me.
My pleasure, Michael. Look, it's hot and even sunny outside, dare I say, but we're dressed in black. I want to be clear to the audience. We are not in mourning for anyone. This is just the Novara regulation uniform.
And the mourning you're suggesting we might be is Larajani. There are people mourning Larajani in Tehran. We will be showing you footage of that later in the show. If you do like tonight's show, go to support.novaramedia.com or novaramedia.com/support, same thing, and become a donor. If you hate tonight's show, no pressure. But if you do like it, I think it would be really lovely if you decided to support the organisation and go to novaramedia.com/support. As we always say, this show is only possible because of our regular donors. Oil prices have today soared after the world's largest gas field was hit by an Israeli airstrike, a processing facility attached to the South Pars gas field, which spans Iranian and Qatari territory in the Persian Gulf, and was struck by Israel this morning. This is a very significant escalation, as so far Israeli strikes had not hit natural gas facilities in Iran. Previously, the United States had been discouraging Israel from attacking energy infrastructure in Iran, fearing the effect it would have on energy markets. But Axios are reporting the Americans gave approval for this particular attack. And Donald Trump posted this shortly after it happened. So this is Trump on Truth Social. Remember, for all those absolute fools out there, Iran is considered by everyone to be the #1 state sponsor of terror. We are rapidly putting them out of business. So the suggestion that bombing their oil facilities is an attempt to put them out of business. Of course, the Gulf states are, furious, actually. About this. A spokesperson for the Qatari Foreign Ministry posted this on Twitter. He hasn't moved over to Truth Social yet. So Majid Al-Ansari says, the Israeli targeting of facilities linked to Iran's South Pars field, an extension of Qatar's North Field, is a dangerous and irresponsible step amid the current military escalation in the region. Targeting energy infrastructure constitutes a threat to global energy security, as well as to the peoples of the region and its environment. We reiterate, as we have repeatedly emphasized, the necessity of avoiding the targeting of vital facilities. We call on all parties to exercise restraint, adhere to international law, and work toward de-escalation in a manner that preserves the security and stability of the region. And the United Arab Emirates has also condemned the attack. But despite that attempt by the Gulf states to distance themselves from this action, Iran has indicated it will strike energy infrastructure in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, and in the UAE. Evacuation orders were issued for citizens and residents near 5 oil refineries and gas fields across those 3 states. An announcement posted on an IRGC-affiliated Telegram channel warned that, quote, these centres have become direct and legitimate targets and will be targeted in the coming hours. Therefore, all citizens, residents and employees are asked to immediately leave these areas and move to a safe distance without any delay. Obviously, this would be, this is a huge escalation if we end up having oil and energy facilities across the Gulf systematically targeted in a retaliation for these strikes on Iranian energy facilities. That would have an enormous impact on supply. And the effect on energy prices has been immediate. So the price for a barrel of oil shot up from $101 at the start of the day to over $108 this afternoon. Aaron, it seemed for a while like Donald Trump wanted to avoid something like this. It was the spike in oil prices, which above everything else was causing a lot of pressure on his presidency, on his administration. They now seem to have just thrown all of that out the window. They're going for Iran's oil facilities. Iran is obviously going to retaliate. And this could just have, really, really dramatic effects on energy markets.
Well, I would say that South Pars gas field is not Iran's. It is Iran's and Qatar's. They are essentially the same, it's the same terrain. It's a de facto attack on Qatar's ability to also generate revenues. And of course, Qatar is, I think one or two in terms of the number one exporter of liquid natural gas right now. It's an extraordinary exporter of LNG. And it's quite striking that Qatar and the UAE are saying that we need to have de-escalation and a calming down and for people to pull back from the brink. This is all coming from one direction. This is all coming from Israel. I mean, one might say it's coming from the US and Israel. It's all coming from Israel. You saw it with the killing of Larijani, and now you're seeing it with this. And I wonder, there is probably a dawning recognition in Tel Aviv that there are not going to be widespread protests. It's not to say there aren't people unhappy with the government in Tehran, but for whatever reason, they aren't happening. They were meant to really begin last night. I think the hoped for jumping off point would have been Nowruz, March 20th, March 21st, Persian or Iranian rather, New Year. The hope would have been that you would have seen more collective action, more public displays of disaffection with the government, more public displays of support for the Shah. There's been, the Shah, I say the Shah, is not the Shah, he wants to be the Shah, Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, the last Shah's son. That would have been the hope. And I think what we've seen in the last 72 hours is a recognition by Israel that that's just simply not going to happen. So what we have instead is a doubling down on a very violent, aggressive course of action, which I think will necessarily entail the collapse of the Gulf states' economies this year. We had some data out a few days ago showing that I think Kuwait and Bahrain will see their GDP go down by about 13% over 2026 if this just carries on for several more months. The presumption was that places like Qatar and the UAE, which already would see, I think, a decline of around 5%, that was not modeling this kind of thing unfolding. So to be clear, Qatar would see an economic contraction of 5% without an attack of this nature. It is an extraordinary escalation. In a way, it's a bigger escalation than even killing Khamenei. Khamenei was 86. I think he was ready for martyrdom. He had repeated bouts of cancer. He was coming to the end of his life. There was some political efficacy for the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic for him to die. That was one of those moments where it actually served the Islamic Republic quite well and probably an Israeli or a US audience as well. Right. Strange thing to say when somebody dies, but there you are. Martyrdom is that central in Shia Islam. This is really different. This is triggering a cascade of events, a sequence of events, which I think leads to total war in the region. I mean, I don't see what else it leads to. When I say total war, I mean the involvement of the Arabic states. Now, does that make any difference to Iran? Not really. They were already fighting Israel, by far the most powerful military in West Asia and the United States. So whether or not the UAE and Qatar and Bahrain decide to get involved or the KSA is broadly immaterial, but it does mean that they will have a different level of investment in the cessation of the conflict. And I will finish with this. I think Israel has made a bet, which is that they are sufficiently invested in the collapse of the Iranian economy, potentially even the balkanization of Iran, that they don't mind if one, several, or even all of the Gulf Arab states go down with it. I don't think they mind. And, you discussed this yesterday in your interview with Trita Parsi in terms of Israel's long-range strategic ambitions about trying to become the policeman. This is about later on, rather. The policeman of the region. I think you can see that through all of this.
Yeah, so that was Daniel Levy yesterday.
Daniel Levy, sorry,
so the former Israeli negotiator.
We'll out.
Trita Parsi, no, we'll keep it in. Trita Parsi is later on when we discuss some of these similar issues. But with Daniel Levy, he was saying that their plan, basically, we were saying it's a possible plan, because what we were discussing, really good interview. We didn't re-upload it, so you have to go and check out the live stream, which is still visible. Do go watch that whole interview, because he was fascinating. But we're talking about the potential for Israel to have blown cross-party support in the United States and what the long-term strategy is then. And he had this phrase, maybe Israel thinks America is in decline, use their power or lose it, use it or lose it. And what they're doing is they're bringing the Americans in to try and take out the Iranians. And Israel wants to almost replace the Americans as the policeman of the Middle East and make sure that all of the powers are so weak, all of the countries are so weak that they have to accede to Israeli demands when it comes to a greater Israel, because they are so reliant on the Israelis for overall security, because the whole place is just a mess. I suppose they want to rule over the destroyed terrain of the region.
There was one reading on this, which, I don't like to talk about the destruction of this or that state, but I remember hearing this claim, which was that either you have the demise of the Israeli nation state as it's presently constituted, or you have, and alongside that, you have a successful, flourishing region, or you have a successful Israel, Greater Israel, and the demise and basically the collapse of much of the rest of the region. I think that's broadly true. Now, that's not to come out on one side or the other. Personally, I think that, it was a huge mistake to have a settler colony in that part of the world. And it's clearly had huge long-term political consequences, which are very adverse. But you might want to go back further. You might say that the dismantling of the Ottoman Empire was a mistake, whatever, right? Or Sykes-Picot was a terrible mistake with 1916, or whatever, the League of Nations fallout, etc. Regardless, I do think that particularly this objective of a greater Israel is going to mean at least 2 or 3 failed states in that part of the world. I mean, starting with Lebanon, we're already seeing that. Israeli nationalists wanted Israel to go as far as the Litani River. I believe it was Ben Gurion at Versailles, when they were making these representations to the great powers after the First World War, that's where they viewed that northern border of Israel going up to the Litani River, where, of course, they're going now. So I think it's a very astute observation. And yet, it's not, that still hasn't quite filled the parameters of the debate in legacy media in the West. This is what we're looking at, an expansionist state, which actually has an interest in the collapse of the state system. And that would affect, we're talking about 150 million plus people. It's extraordinary. And yet it's not being called out by Europe or of course, certainly not by North Americans.
Well, Donald Trump, actually, his posts have got even more sinister this afternoon. So he posted this on Truth Social a couple hours ago. I wonder what would happen if we finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use it, we don't be responsible for the so-called Strait. So this is the Strait of Hormuz. That would get some of our non-responsive allies in gear and fast. President DJT. So he's saying, what if we completely destroyed Iran and said, screw this, we don't even care about the Middle East. We don't need the energy that's coming through the Strait because, we frack, we've got our own oil resources. It's in particular the Asian countries who use energy from the Strait of Hormuz, and then Europe to some extent as well. So they're saying, what if we just blow it up, withdraw, and then let the Asians and the Europeans clean up the mess? I mean, that seems to be the argument there. Obviously, also, there are 90 million Iranians, so I don't know where they figure in this scenario. Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt responded to that post on Fox News today.
On a truth that was sent out earlier today, 7:22 a.m. Eastern Time. I wonder what would happen if we, quote, finished off what's left of the Iranian terror state and let the countries that use it, we don't, be responsible for the so-called Strait. That would get some of our non-responsive allies in gear and fast, President DJT. Has there been any movement overnight on behalf of our allies that has softened their position about going through the Strait of Hormuz?
Not overnight, but the president and his team, especially Secretary Hegseth and Secretary Rubio, continue to be in touch with their counterparts in Europe and, of course, our allies in the Arab Gulf region to step up and do more to help the United States in securing the Strait of Hormuz. This is to their benefit, more so than it is to the benefit of the United States. Thanks to President Trump, we are a net exporter of energy. We don't need the Strait of Hormuz for our energy here at home. For the American people, of course, we want the Strait to be open for the global oil market and to stabilize prices and bring them down again. And we have options the military has options to continue doing that. But the president is right to call on our allies to step up to do more.
I mean, this is completely crazy, right? Because the whole idea of having a global hegemon is that they're supposed to maintain law and order. Now, it's not necessarily going to be just. If you try and go against it, you might be crushed. Right, it's a bit like the British Empire when they say we're going to guarantee free trade and sort of freedom of the seas. That was kind of America's wager. We are not necessarily going to allow democracy everywhere, but what we will pretend to guarantee at least is stability in the Middle East, stability in key energy markets. And so you're not necessarily going to have complete autonomy to do whatever you want, but so long as you go along with the Americans, we will guarantee some sort of stability. What the Americans are now saying is, oh, we're actually independent when it comes to oil. So we don't even care what happens in the Middle East. But we are going to throw a few grenades over there, and then you can clean up the mess.
This is crazy, Michael. This is the craziest thing that Trump has done so far. So let's just recap. They start a conflict which leads to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. 20 million barrels of oil goes through that tiny slither of sea, of water every day, or it did, doesn't anymore. They start a war which leads to the closure of that, and now they're saying, well, we don't need it. We don't need it. We don't need to open it. It doesn't matter. They're the ones that closed it in the first place. And of course, the big strategic win for Trump now is it's not going to be a regime change in Tehran. The big strategic win would be reopening it. So basically returning to the status quo ante. Okay. Nonetheless, the biggest suckers in all of this, Michael, the biggest suckers are Americans, the American allies. The biggest suckers, Europe. We're huge suckers. Not just with this, but also with Ukraine, right? Huge suckers. We're engaged in a set of foreign policy responses which are massively disadvantaging us. The Asians. If you look at opinion polling about who is least in favor of this conflict, which country, it's quite striking actually. Japan. Everybody in Japan is basically anti this war because so much of their energy is coming from West Asia and the Gulf states. And of course, it's an industrial power. Japan makes a living by exporting consumer durables and cars, and it needs affordable hydrocarbons to make that model work. And it's dying. The same for South Korea, to a lesser extent the same for Taiwan, but South Korea and Japan are really screwed by all of this. Two historic allies of US empire, Western Europe, East Asia. Add a third one, the Gulf states. I mean, wow, these guys are real, to use that term again, suckers. I think the Saudis were talking about a $350 billion investment in the United States. You've had the Qataris invest billions, tens, hundreds of billions, ditto the UAE, ditto the Kuwaitis over the decades. The bet was if we invest this much money in the American economy, they'll keep us safe. The Americans are saying, actually, not only will we not keep you safe, we'll start a fight which imperils your safety, and then we'll leave. And here's the thing, it's a really important point. Let's say Qatar wanted to invest $350 billion in the US economy over the last decade, or Saudi. If they had just spent 1/10 of that in Iran, at least they have someone to call, right? 1/10. 5%, you have someone to call. Someone that you can de-escalate the situation with. They didn't do that because they didn't think they needed to do it, because they never realized the possibility that America would be this negligent in terms of its role of being the global policeman. Finally, if you look at somewhere like Kuwait, I said this before, but this is really important. The Arabs had a very calculating view, a transactional view in terms of their relationship with not just the United States, but in particular this White House, right? Trump is a businessman. They bought that shtick. Trump is a businessman. If we sign the business deals, if we send dollars and, it's that part of the world and they have us invest in this or that, and we buy football players and, we invest in AI and all that, and we build data servers in Manama or whatever, then we'll be fine. What they didn't account for is ideology. And I mean the ideology of Zionism. No matter how much money UAE, Qatar, Saudi invest in the American economy, it doesn't matter given the strength of the Israel lobby. Maybe there is some speculative figure at which point, actually America would have their backs because they would be so dependent on investment from the Arabian Peninsula. But that is something they didn't quite understand. They bought this idea that America is a commercial empire where all that counts is money. That's not true, certainly not in this instance.
Which is why, probably the main reason, right, why they were, other than America being more powerful than Iran, it was that America was seen as a more pragmatic power because it cared about money, whereas Iran was a revolutionary state. Right. And they didn't like this idea of having a revolutionary neighbor that had a revolutionary form of Islam that they thought could undermine sort of the social order in their nations. So they preferred to deal with the Americans, even though, culturally quite different, but they thought, we can deal with you because you just care about money, order, that's fine. And now, actually, the Americans look as ideological, if not more, than the Iranians.
Much more ideological, right?
And more revolutionary in terms of a desire to upturn the current order of things.
Look, the idea of a greater Israel, which, as we've already said, is probably premised on the collapse of at least one or more states in this part of the world. And I don't, of course, mean they've already collapsed Palestine as a political possibility. I'm not talking about Gaza and the West Bank. I'm talking about Lebanon. I'm talking about Iran, Syria, if need be, Iraq, Egypt, if need be, anywhere. that itself is a very revolutionary creed. I mean, that's no less revolutionary than Ayatollah Khomeini saying in 1979 that they planned to export the revolution, the Islamic awakening, as it was called in Tehran, across the whole region, all the way through to Lebanon. Of course, in 1982, you had Iranian-backed militias that engaged in suicide bombings in French and American military bases, and they left Lebanon as a result of that. I think that's a really important observation. What you're seeing now with Netanyahu, with this project of forming a greater Israel, is no less revolutionary. And I think probably, you've got to be fair to the likes of Qatar and the UAE. They're probably recognizing that, but it's really late in the day, and it's possibly too late, because we're now going to see this tit-for-tat reprisal, and they are going to be set back a very, very, very long time. It's been said a lot, but Kuwait never recovered from the first Gulf War. Never recovered economically, geopolitically. Very possible that the same is now going to happen with Qatar and the UAE.
An American empire is never going to recover from the second Trump term. Like the 4-year aberration, maybe it could have done. That there was a big desire among, most of the middle powers after the first 4 years of Donald Trump to say, okay, let's forget that happened. NATO's back. Biden's in the White House. He's a very normal president. He was happy to let atrocities happen in the Middle East, but when it came to sort of alliances with the middle powers, he did sort of try and play that role. When it came to Israel in Gaza, he didn't really put any limit on what they could do to the Palestinians. But when the Egyptians said, if you let Israel ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from Gaza and put them all into our country, we're going to collapse. Biden said, okay, my job is actually to not let big middle powers collapse. And so he stands in and says, I'm going to play the global policeman role and say, do what you want with the Palestinians, but please do not collapse Egypt. Yeah. Now, Trump is in power. Everything is up for debate.
Yeah. And the people watching this with the sort of biggest amount of concern is Taiwan, is South Korea, right? You've just seen the Arabs, the Gulf Arabs, make this historic mistake of putting all their eggs in the basket of trusting the White House. And this could, I mean, I'm not being dramatic. It might sound dramatic. This could genuinely be the end for some of them in terms of the government of Bahrain, Qatar, UAE. If this is a long, protracted conflict now in that part of the world, it could be the end for them as, viable statelets, sovereign entities, which of course they're not in a meaningful sense. But, there's a map. They have borders. You can get a passport for these countries. They are somewhat sovereign states. If you're in Taipei or Seoul or even Tokyo, I think, this definitely wakes you up to the possibility that you could see a repeat of this in the event of China trying to reunify with Taiwan, in the event potentially of North Korea looking to redraw that border with the South. I mean, that's a huge undertaking because, of course, America has always had the most militarized border in the world. But as we saw in the last 7 days, America is pulling firepower out of Southeast Asia and East Asia and taking it to this conflict. So that shows you the priorities of the White House. Quite extraordinary. Zionism and the Israel lobby is guiding the foreign policy of the world's great power. It's just incredibly obvious. And if your job is to keep people safe in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, I think that's going to worry you.
Let's stick on this theme of Trump ripping up alliances. He's becoming increasingly agitated about the refusal of US allies to get involved in the war of choice, which he created without sort of asking them first. He said this about NATO, though, at a press conference yesterday.
Are you rethinking the United States' relationship with NATO possibly getting out?
Well, I'm disappointed in NATO that we spend trillions of dollars on NATO. Think of it, trillions over the years, many trillions of dollars. It's one of the reasons we have deficits and we help other countries. And when they don't help us, I mean, it's certainly something that we should think about. I don't need Congress for that decision. As you probably know, I can make that decision myself. I'd work with some very smart people. And I'd always deal with Congress anyway, but I don't need Congress for that decision. But, when you say rethink, I have nothing currently in mind, but I will say that I'm not exactly thrilled when we help them with Ukraine. Look, Ukraine would have been over in one day if we didn't help. Frankly, Ukraine would have been over in the first day. They had the best equipment in the world. It was our equipment.
And right-wing parties in Europe have begun reappraising their lavish support for Trump at the start of the Iran war. 2 weeks ago, Kemi Badenoch was chastising Keir Starmer for not going all in by helping the US bomb Iran. Yesterday, she uploaded this video to social media.
I'm Keir Starmer's biggest critic. There's a lot of stuff that I believe that he's done wrong, but the words coming from the White House are completely wrong. I think it's actually quite childish. There is a lot that can be said behind closed doors. We've got President Zelensky in our country today. The Western alliance having an argument with itself, I think, sends the wrong signal to our opponents in Iran or in Russia. We need to be strengthening the relationship between the UK and the US, irrespective of who is president or who is prime minister. But I think those words coming from the White House were childish.
So I think the word she's talking about is him saying that Keir Starmer is no Churchill, which she's saying was childish. Starmer is in no mood to let Badenoch rewrite history and forget her support for Trump's war. In a response to a question about Starmer's appointment of Peter Mandelson at PMQs today, Starmer responded by saying this.
Now, obviously, this is a question of my judgment, but what about her judgment? She wanted to rush into a war with Iran without thinking it through. At the weekend, Mr. Speaker, three weeks in, she said, oh, there isn't a clear plan behind the US strikes in Iran. That's the question she should have asked at the start. The decision to commit the UK to a war is the biggest decision a Prime Minister can take, and she got it completely wrong.
He's right, isn't he?
My goat. Keir Starmer, you won't hear that again, will you? My goat. No, look, to be serious, Starmer's got, I think, a fair bit wrong in the last 18 months, understatement. And I think the fact that we have military bases in this country which are the literal jumping off point for long-range US bombers to bomb Iran, I think that's obviously unacceptable. But this position is really, really important. And actually, if you look at the polling, Michael, Ipsos Mori had some data out, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago. Starmer has overtaken Farage as the preferred prime minister. I think Farage was down 5, Starmer was up 3, something like that. I don't think people aren't reappraising Starmer in the whole. I think he's kind of screwed anyway. I think his political brand is very tarnished. Again, slight understatement. But I do think on this kind of issue, people that maybe don't knows or were, thinking about voting for reform, I do think it gives them a second thought. I think Nigel Farage screwed this up a lot more than Kemi Badenoch, because it wasn't just Farage, it was Tice, it was Zahawi, it was basically the entire reform team except the recent Tory additions, actually, apart from Zahawi, were slightly, generic. And
I think that was kind of a timing thing, though, right? Because I think Robert Jenrick did make a statement where he was more sceptical about the war, but I think that's because a few days had passed, and by that point, it was already clear that this was a disaster.
But basically, it was Andrea Jenkins as well was kind of like, she was still saying crazy stuff objectively, but it wasn't quite as crazy. But you're right, that probably was also a timing thing. But Tice was going on Al Arabiya. What the hell? Richard Tice's grand tour of the Arabian Peninsula. He was going on Al Arabiya saying that we should be involved in a war against Iran. Crazy stuff. Complete, rush of blood to the head. But I think as well, it showed Badenoch to be rather amateurish. But Michael, that is a huge deal for a Conservative Party leader to be calling a US president childish. Is quite extraordinary. Obviously, the rest of what she said was idiotic. We need to strengthen our ties with the United States. No, here, Ed Davey is absolutely right. We need to be weakening our ties with the US. Now, of course, I like to be the left-wing radical on this show. You like to be the pragmatic centrist. But let me be pragmatic. I understand you can't do that all at once. It needs to be gradual. You need to be smart. And a great place to start, as Ed Davey said, is to no longer have a nuclear deterrent dependent on US technology, which is what Trident is. If the Americans want us to not be able to use Trident in the long term, they can stop it because the missiles are serviced the other side of the Atlantic. Now, can we create a substitute technology? It's not as easy as it sounds, actually. An ICBM from a submarine is quite tough technology to do and reshore, but we can do it. I'm pretty confident of that. So that's absolutely where you start. And I think now is the moment for technological, political, military, and energy sovereignty and autonomy from the US. This is in a way, Michael, it's not a nice thing to say when you look at the horrific scenes in Lebanon and Iran, but in a way, this is an opportunity for Europe to actually take itself seriously and reindustrialize, put the renewable agenda at the center of that reindustrialization. There probably does need to be some sort of conversation in the short to medium term about, for instance, gas. I don't think it's central. Some others will disagree. We certainly shouldn't be doing fracking. We certainly shouldn't be doing coal. Nuclear energy as well. Germany's gotten rid of it. Britain is building some, but not very much. I think we need a lot more of that stuff. So in a way, this has catalyzed a huge opportunity for a sensible conversation around state-led reindustrialization. The left should be very confident about that. There are multiple reasons here why the right, particularly Reform, look very weak and shambling. You know, Farage today, we're not talking about it on this show, but he's basically defaulted to his safe space, his comfort zone of being, you know, the carnival town crier and talking about Muslims praying in Trafalgar Square. They've done that because they can't talk about the serious issues. They've done that because they can't talk about state-led reindustrialization. They can't talk about a foreign policy detached from Washington. So instead we get this barking, which frankly doesn't have any relevance to 99% of the population. You know, I'll finish with this, Michael. All politics is local, always has been, but that's so true now. And I think it's really the trajectory post-Brexit. I wonder, have Reform peaked? When I see Sarah Pochin, the MP for Runcorn, talk about what's going on in Trafalgar Square, central London, that is not what the people who voted for her care about. They care about their constituency. They want representation on the national stage for a seat in Cheshire, not Zone 1.
And the context there is she's complaining about some Muslims praying in Trafalgar Square, isn't she?
There was the Adhan, there was a call to prayer. And look, People, we live in a free country. People are entitled to have a criticism of that or not like it. But she's the MP for Runcorn, right? She's the MP for Runcorn. She's not the MP for Central London, for the two cities.
Also, there's some quite big things going on in the world, right? To care about some people doing the call to prayer in Trafalgar Square.
But this is their safe space, right? This is their safe, comfortable space where they get 20% of the vote. And I think if you're Keir Starmer and you see them defaulting to that, you're probably thinking, hold on a sec. You know what? I actually, and this is a topic for another day, I don't think they want to form the next government. I think it's too much like hard work. I think they want 100 MPs and to be a junior partner with the Conservative government. Much easier. And you get the ministerial cars, but you don't have to make the really hard decisions.
In terms of being a watershed moment, you know, in terms of sort of the middle powers, the people who have been under the American umbrella for, since the Second World War, really, do you think this is a more significant moment than Greenland? Because, you know, it was when Trump was saying, I'm going to I'm going to put tariffs on Europe if they don't give me Greenland. That was when you sort of got Mark Carney stand up and you had that moment at Davos where they all stand up and they give these very brave speeches where they don't say, you know, we're ending the alliance, which probably would be a mistake at this point in time. They say, we are going to build more capacity so we have independence from this alliance, which is sensible.
Yeah.
You know, the main critique is, are they putting their money where their mouth is? I think the message from people like Mark Carney was entirely sensible. But that was ultimately about tweets and words, right? This is much more consequential. Obviously, it's much more consequential for the people of Iran, you know, first and foremost. But in terms of the interests of those American allies, which is really, you know, America never guaranteed to its allies that it wouldn't cause terror and destruction for people outside its security umbrella. That was never part of the deal. But what was part of the deal is that they won't cause, you know, random, unnecessary harm and then say, oh, actually, F you, we don't care because this is going to harm you more than us, right? That is the breach of contract is not really, you know, harming some people in the Middle East. George W. Bush did that. But what George W. Bush never did is say, I'm going to increase your energy prices. I'm going to create a huge security dilemma for you. And if you complain about that, F you.
Yeah.
That's what's changed.
They've gone crazy. You know, I saw Matt Goodwin say, do I support regime change in Iran if it means I have to pay a little bit more to fill up my car? Yes. It's just the polar opposite of what right-wing populism has said for 25 years. And they're talking about, don't increase the fuel duty, it's 5 pence. We're looking at potentially $200 a barrel of oil. What are you talking about? It's just so unserious. And again, talking about Matt Goodwin, you know, he's talking about his new book and he's walking through central London. It does make you wonder, Michael, you've got an MP for Runcorn talking about Trafalgar Square. You've got a guy who was trying to stand in Gorton and Denton in Greater Manchester, walking through Westminster. Maybe they just want to be on TV walking through London. Maybe they don't. Maybe, despite this constant talk about actually the rest of the country outside the M25, they don't like those places. They don't want to be in those places. They don't want to represent those places. They want to take the votes from those places because they know it's a path to power. But I wonder, if they're centering them, believe me, you know, the median voter in Gorton and Denton, the median voter in Runcorn, does not think it's worth, you know, starting a war with Tehran, which, by the way, will not change the regime, will not change the government. They do not think that's worth $200 a barrel of oil. Nobody does. Nobody does, unless you're a fanatic like, fundamentally the people in Reform. Why are they fanatics? First of all, there's two parts to this. Anything the left says, they have to do the opposite, right? This is called negative polarization, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're good on this stuff. You love this stuff. So if the left says there's a genocide in Gaza, whatever your views on that, and they make the argument, they appeal to the various parts of international law, they talk about the casualties, they point to the genocidal statements made by leading Israeli politicians, they talk about literally what the soldiers themselves are saying in the field. There's a genocide in Gaza. Because the left is saying that, their view is, well, there isn't a genocide. Well, why? Well, because the left is saying there is, so there can't be. That's one part of it, right? That's one part driving the politics of all this. And the other is, frankly, the Israel lobby. Reform talk about how they want to put the interests of their constituents first and the British people first. There is one foreign country which has a Friends of, has a different name now, Reform Friends of, and it's Reform Friends of Israel. And that's for a reason. Alan Mendoza is a key advisor now to Nigel Farage on foreign policy. Look the guy up. You will struggle to find a more hardcore advocate for the national interest of the state of Israel. Which, by the way, whatever that happens, but Reform have got the guy now on their payroll advising their leader when they say they want to put this country first. You can't do both.
Mm. I mean, we've been focusing on Iran and the Strait of Hormuz because we're talking really about sort of geopolitics and alliances. And obviously what the Europeans and the East Asians care about is the energy prices. And the Europeans especially have started talking more about what would happen if Iran collapses as a state and then there's 90 million people, many of whom are looking to leave the country, and there being another refugee crisis akin to what happened in Syria. And so that's what, those states are most concerned about, and why I think they feel most let down or betrayed by Donald Trump in terms of, or I suppose the United States, who had claimed that they would look after their interests. The human costs are potentially most drastic right now, though, in Lebanon. Less geopolitically important because it doesn't have energy, and it's a population of 6 million people instead of 90 million people. But what we're seeing there is really, really atrocious. So let's look at what I think is now, the familiar scene, really, of Israel reducing an entire tower block to rubble. It's insane that kind of image has just become normalized, right? We've seen it so much over the past, since October the 7th, essentially, because it's a missile, but it looks like a controlled demolition. And the idea of Israel being, the policeman of the entire Middle East, where they can just, go around and act like a state, because normally it's a state that gets to approve a controlled demolition, and they're just going into other countries and demolishing their buildings. Just some context. So 1 million people have already been displaced in Lebanon. Over 900 people have been killed. Aaron, I wonder if you could sort of speak to that, the disregard for sovereignty, for people's lives, for people's homes by Israel in Lebanon right now.
Well, you were talking about the role of the US empire and what it claimed to uphold. Of course, didn't always do it, but what it claimed to uphold. A big part of that global policeman role was respecting sovereignty. Again, didn't always do it, right? You look at getting rid of Arbenz in Guatemala or Mossadegh in Iran in 1953, but that was underhand internal coups. Overtly, you said that you respect state sovereignty. And I think in two key regards, Israel is really representing a massive and sustained break with this. The first is, like you say, just destroying stuff. It is not normal, to repeat, it is not normal for a head of state, which is what Khamenei was, to be assassinated. It is not normal for somebody like Larijani just to be killed. It is not normal. And I've seen some takes on social media saying, well, it's the end of the liberal era, end of the liberal state. We're going back to the norm. This wasn't the normal before liberalism either. You didn't do this, right? You didn't do it for a bunch of reasons, not least because you need to have somebody to negotiate with when it's all over.
I suppose the last time it was normal is when, in the medieval times when kings used to go into battle on their horses, and then you would try and kill the opponent king on their horse.
There was still some conventions around what you should and shouldn't do. I mean, there are some examples, like for instance, Crassus, when he invaded, when he took on the Parthian Empire, the Persians of the time, a Roman general, but also in his own era. The Elon Musk of that, I think it's the 4th century, I might be a bit wrong. the Elon Musk of that, that era of the Roman Empire. And the wives' tale is not true necessarily. He was defeated by the Persians, and they poured molten gold down his throat because he was so in love with money. Probably didn't happen. But anyway, interesting story. And people say this is now repeating, or if not repeating, at least rhyming with the tale of Donald Trump completely screwing up in the Strait of Hormuz. So I think in these two key ways, not respecting state sovereignty overtly. It's not like Israel is saying, we'll respect state sovereignty, and then they do it. They're just saying, no, we're not respecting state sovereignty. That's a big shift. And the killing people is also a big shift. Let's say tomorrow, Aragchi, the Iranian foreign secretary, says, I'm now the leader of the country, right? I want a peace settlement with Israel. We're going to end our nuclear weapons program. We're going to end any proxies threatening Israel, doing all the things that Israel wants. What's to stop? And let's say on one small detail, he says, but we're going to keep for now our ballistic missile program. And then Israel kills him. What is the threshold here for Israel not to kill somebody who would be speaking on behalf of the Iranian state? My view is, and I may be wrong, I'm wrong about lots of things. My view is there isn't one, because the goal here is to fundamentally balkanize Iran. And it's not just Iran, it's a few other countries too, but Iran is the big threat to them in the region.
Iranians on Wednesday gathered in Tehran to mourn the death of Ali Larijani. The procession also commemorated the head of Iran's Basij volunteer paramilitary force, Gholam Reza Soleimani, who was killed on Tuesday. It also commemorated the sailors of the Dena ship who were killed by a US torpedo off the coast of Sri Lanka earlier this month. Israel announced on Wednesday that they'd also killed Iran's intelligence minister, Esmail Khatib. The New York Times has a striking map which shows exactly who in Iran's leadership has been assassinated so far. Most of those killed were members of the defense establishment who were killed alongside Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei on the first day of the war. Aside from Khamenei, Larijani is the most senior political leader to have been killed so far. So will this decapitation strategy against the Islamic Republic work? And what are Israel even trying to achieve? Earlier, I spoke to Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute, an author of Losing an Enemy on Obama's Nuclear Deal and Treacherous Alliance on the History of Relations between Israel and Iran.
So the decapitation strategy by Israel and secondary by the United States has definitely managed to achieve some tactical successes for Israel and the United States. But so far, we have not seen those tactical successes be translated into strategic successes. The first big one, of course, was the assassination of the supreme leader. It not only did not end up becoming a strategic success, it actually became a strategic failure, because it led to a scenario in which the Iranian system actually coalesced, converged, and you also had the base of the Islamic Republic in Iran, which probably is no more than 15 to 20%, actually be quite energized. They see this as an existential fight. So you had major regime consolidation following this, rather than what the US and Israel had hoped for, which was that this would lead to regime collapse. Now, Ali Larijani is a very significant person, but also obviously not as significant as Khamenei was. Whether that will lead to collapse, we see no sign of. Whether they will be translated into strategic success, again, too early to tell. But what we can say, however, is that it is leading to a scenario in which the people that probably could play a role in a potential diplomacy that would offer Trump an off-ramp are being killed off deliberately by the Israelis. Now, whether they're only targeting them or whether they're targeting them in order to kill off the off-ramps is perhaps unknown at this point, but that is the end result. All wars end up in some form of diplomacy. This one will too. Trump is already looking for an off-ramp. He's seen that the Iranians are not interested in any talks about ceasefire. But the people within the Iranian system that would lead those talks and that would be able to play the role of ensuring that the system as a whole would go along with such an arrangement at some point are the ones that are being killed off. And if this is deliberate, that would suggest that the Israelis are deliberately trying to kill off Trump's off-ramps and making sure that it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to end this war. From the Israeli standpoint, they don't want an end to this war. They want to continue. They want to degrade Iran's industrial base. They want to destroy as much as possible of the country, not of the regime, of the country, in order to make sure that whatever happens after this war, Iran will have been set back so significantly so that its power simply will not be where it was before, and as a result cannot pose a challenge to Israel. That is their objective. It has nothing to do with democracy, it has nothing to do with, frankly, even changing the regime. This is the same strategy that they've been pursuing in Gaza, in Lebanon, and other places, mowing the lawn. And it's all about making sure that the lawn is as short as possible. It doesn't matter what color the lawn is or who is in charge of the lawn. It's about mowing it. Now they're doing it on a much larger scale in Iran. And they don't want to end it prematurely. So they're worried that Trump is going to look for an off-ramp. And again, this may be the intent, it may not be, but the end effect nevertheless is that they're killing off the off-ramps.
And I want to talk about the effect of these decapitations on the Islamic Republic, because I keep hearing people say, the Iranians were prepared for this. Every person the Israelis kill, there will be someone to replace them. But surely there is an amount of sort of institutional memory, sort of personal charismatic leadership that's going to be very difficult to replace. And, if it's just the supreme leader, I can see how the system might sort of, I suppose, make up for any legitimacy that might have gone by having this charismatic leader go. But if just all of these different points of leadership are being taken out one by one, surely that's going to have a really damaging effect.
Definitely. There's no way you can say that this is not costing the Iranians a lot. In fact, it absolutely is. The question is if it's bringing about the type of collapse that either would cause the collapse of the regime or would cause the collapse of their military operations and their defenses. That's a different story. Now, you can say that, look, if this goes on for a very long time and eventually there's hardly anyone left, there's no institutional memory, the system as a whole is broken. That absolutely is a scenario that can occur. The question is, how long time will that take? And is that more time than what Trump has and what the other countries have? Now, Israel believes that it has a tremendous amount of time because its pain tolerance is very high, particularly if the U.S. is included in the war. But the GCC states have a very limited tolerance and time. Trump himself may not have that much time because this is starting to eat away from his base as well. We just had a poll that came out this morning that showed that while the support for the war within Trump voters is still strong at 76%, nevertheless dropped about 10% in the last 2 weeks or so, you're still seeing some cracks. 79%, according to our poll, would be very happy if Trump just declared victory right away and ended this war. 60 or so percent, if I remember correctly, are dead set against any ground troops. And many of them, a majority, are also worried about gas prices going up. So you're starting to see that the things that Trump should be worried about are starting to happen. They won't happen right away. He probably has a couple of more weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, before this pain is becoming a main problem. But it's going to take more than 2 or 3 weeks for the Israelis to do the type of assassinations that actually would have the impact that you're talking about. Take a look what happened in Hezbollah. In Hezbollah's case, the Israelis actually took out a very large number of their commanders and leaders, and blew them up through those pagers. Tremendous intelligence work that led to a very large number of the leaders and a very, very large number of civilians getting killed. But now Hezbollah is back. They have completely reorganized. They have completely changed their tactics in the war. And Israel is facing some significant challenges in Lebanon right now. And that's just an organization. That's not a state. So I think that while theoretically what you're saying is absolutely possible, and perhaps that point can be reached, the question is, can that point be reached before the global economy collapses, before the GCC states essentially cannot continue where they are right now, before Trump's base turns against Israel?
And I suppose on the theme of the world economy potentially collapsing and pressure on the GCC states, today Iran's South Pass gas field was attacked, the largest gas field in the world. Qatar has come out strongly against this strike done by the Israelis, apparently with collaboration from the Americans. What's your interpretation of this development?
The Israelis are trying to expand the war further. They want the Iranians to strike back at the GCC states. They want to drag the GCC states into this war. That gas field, the reason why the Qataris are saying something about this is because half of that gas field is Qatar's gas field. There's no border that delineates that gas field. It's a gas field. And the Qataris are the only ones that actually right now are extracting gas from it in a large amount because the Iranians, because of sanctions, don't have the technology to do so. So this is effort at actually expanding the war, forcing the GCC to come in on America and Israel's side. The Qataris are very much resisting this. They don't want this to happen because they believe that at the end of that war, if they're involved in it, they're going to be forced to go along with the Abraham Accord and all of these other things and ally themselves with Israel, which is something they don't want to do and their populations are dead set against. So what the Israelis are doing here is trying to force this war to become larger in the sense of more countries being forced to enter it against Iran. That's not to say that the Qataris are happy with Iranians at all. They're very furious with Iranians for the manner in which the Iranians have also attacked their territory. But I think it's very clear that the Iranians are retaliating against the Qataris. They're not trying to get the Qataris into the war. They're retaliating because of bases that are American bases there, etc. And I think a lot of this is very questionable from the standpoint of international law. But that's different from actually trying to get them to join into that war. I think what the rest of the region fears, of course, is that the Iranians will retaliate against this by striking at Emirati and Saudi oil facilities, which then would put further strain on the global economy.
And predictably, this has shot up the price of oil, which is something that Trump seems to see as a priority. He doesn't want the oil price to rise. He's got midterms coming up later in the year. This is the kind of thing the American public will notice. Has he judged that this gambit to try and bring the Gulf states directly into the war is worth an $8 increase in the price of a barrel of oil? Or is it just, am I sort of suggesting there's more coherence coming from Washington than there actually is?
The Trump administration felt this war was going to be over within 100 hours. They told regional states, don't worry, this will be done within 4 days. They had no preparation for any of these scenarios. They had not done anything to be able to get Americans out of the GCC states. They had nothing done to prepare for flights. They have admitted that they didn't think that the Iranians were going to hit the GCC states. They admitted that they didn't think the Iranians were going to close the Strait of Hormuz. I was in meetings with former officials that were debating this issue, and I was taken aback by how many of them actually thought that there's no way the Iranians are going to close the Strait of Hormuz because they saw that as a suicide step. They were wrong on 2 points. First of all, the Iranians view this as an existential fight. So all of the things that were off the table before are no longer off the table. Secondly, the Iranians have figured out how to close the straits for some while keeping it open for others, which is very different from the suicide option that was considered 20 years ago when the US was wargaming it, in which the Iranians would be putting mines in the Strait of Hormuz. That's not what they're doing. What they're doing is that they're essentially making it so risky to go through the straits, and they are the source of the risk, so that they only permit certain states that give them concessions to do so, whereas others are not allowed. So the Indians, the Pakistanis, the Chinese, the Russians, they can go through the straits, but it's closed for everyone else.
And what's your view on the significance of Cargill Island? It keeps coming up. Obviously, Donald Trump bombed it on Friday night, but not the oil facilities. I've seen Lindsey Graham has been out on network TV over the past 24 hours, sort of reiterating this idea that the Americans could just seize it. It does seem like it is a significant choke point. If Iran exports 90% of its oil via this terminal, then the Americans taking it out would presumably be, significantly difficult for the Iranians to handle. Do you think that will come into play?
Well, first of all, it would be devastating for the Iranians, but they have dealt with this before. During the Iraq-Iran war, the Iraqis were constantly bombing it, and the Iranians were forced to find workarounds. Whether they can find those again remains to be seen, but there's no doubt that that would be devastating for the Iranians. But their retaliation would also then be against oil installations throughout the GCC, and they have shown their ability to continue to do so, despite the fact that the U.S. keeps on saying that there's less and less drones being shot. When you talk to Gulf officials, that's not what they're saying. They feel that they're under even more fire than they were before. So I think it's very clear. The Iranians have a lot of escalatory options that they have not exercised yet. Those are even more devastating for the global economy. I think the fact that Trump only hit the military facilities and did not hit the oil installations is precisely because of an awareness that Trump too has escalatory options, but they're extremely costly for the US itself.
An Iranian official today said that Iran has sort of more advanced weapons that it is yet to deploy. And it suggested that if its gas fields are hit in the future, they will bring them into play. What kind of weapons would they be talking about? Is that ballistic missiles or?
We know that they say that they have ballistic missiles that are more advanced than the ones that they have used. We've seen that some of them may have been used, and some of the missiles that they've been using against Israel this time around that I don't think were used last time are missiles that actually change trajectory up to 90 degrees mid-air, which makes it very difficult for air defense systems to shoot them down, because those missiles are, because the manner in which you have to calculate the trajectory of that missile is thrown out the window if the missile actually has an ability to change direction. They're also using missiles that actually shoot off a larger set of missiles, smaller munitions, but nevertheless more difficult to shoot down. And we also seen that some of the missiles that they have shot actually have been intercepted, but they're so strong that they keep on flying and still hit the target. So the interceptions are not strong enough to be able to prevent those missiles. Now, if they have additional missiles or other forms of drones or weapons, short-range missiles that they could use in the Persian Gulf, etc., we have not seen. The Iranians oftentimes claim to have things that they don't, but sometimes when they claim these things, it turns out that they actually do have those things. They have, for instance, hinted that they have missiles that can shoot down and sink an American aircraft carrier. I don't know if they do have that, but I do know that the U.S. Navy has kept itself 3,000 kilometers away from Iran's reach, precisely out of a fear that the Iranians might have those weapons.
And this discussion of sort of missiles and weaponry, it does make me think that as well as underestimating the resiliency of the political system in Iran, the Americans have potentially underestimated the industrial capacity of Iran and its sort of technical expertise. Does that sound correct to you?
There has been a massive underestimation of the Iranians on several different fronts: regime cohesion, technical capabilities, resilience, overall strength. I mean, the whole war was premised on this false notion that the Israelis very aggressively pushed for, which is that Iran is at its weakest point ever. And as a result, they have no choice but to either give up or surrender or be defeated. And as a result, Trump, this would not be a difficult thing for you. You will be the hero. You will be the one that potentially gets rid of this regime after 4 decades. This just requires a little bit of a push from you. And that's why the American side kept on telling regional states, this will only take 100 hours. We're now about to finish the 3rd week of this war.
That was Trita Parsi speaking to me earlier today. And we'll end the show with some updates on those retaliatory attacks by Iran. So we said at the start of the show that they had warned that there were 5 different sites in the region that they were going to attack and that workers and civilians should evacuate. The BBC now reporting that there is extensive damage from missile attacks on Qatar Oil, or a Qatari oil processing site. So they say Qatar's state-owned petroleum company says missiles have struck Ras Laffan, a major oil processing site in the country. And these images that we're showing you now are apparently from Riyadh. So there are, or Saudi Arabia has said its air defences shot down 4 ballistic missiles fired towards Riyadh, with debris falling across parts of the city, AP reports. But then these are videos circulating which do appear to show fires and explosions on the ground. So there's question as to whether those missiles were really all intercepted. But essentially, yeah, what we are seeing, Aaron, is the retaliation that Iran had promised. They said that these energy facilities in the Gulf should be evacuated because they were going to do a retaliatory attack. And that's what's happened. I suppose the question is, do the Gulf states say, okay, so very clearly, as Trita was saying there, very clearly, the Israelis have done this because they want to draw the Gulf states directly into the war. Whether that will make much difference militarily is one issue. I think that probably politically the Israelis are feeling a little bit exposed because it's so clear that this is an Israeli and American war and the Israelis push the Americans into it, and that there would be a bit more, I suppose, diplomatic cover if it became, if the Gulf states got involved. It would then seem like less of a civilizational conflict because you'd have Arab countries involved as well. Do you think the Gulf countries will play ball with that? Will they say, okay, well, now we have been attacked, I suppose we will have to bomb Iran? Or do you think that they'll be smart enough to sort of say, this is still not our war?
Why would they do that?
I mean, I hope that's...
That would be my question. If the US Air Force in Israel isn't enough to knock out Iran, what difference is this going to make? And this is a really important point, Michael. You're looking at arguably the two most advanced air forces in the world. I mean, I'm sure the Chinese might say something different about that, but the Israeli Air Force is a very, very powerful air force, not least because it has access to F-35s. And Iran is taking it. So the idea that, a few more F-35s, and F-16s from the UAE and the KSA are making a difference is obviously ridiculous. For now, I think it's smart for them to pull their punches. I mean, how long that is the case, I don't know. If this goes on for months, then clearly at some point it's a matter of national prestige to be seen to be defending yourself. And I think you're right. Israel is doing this for a number of reasons, not least because having other Arab nations on side, other Muslim powers on side, changes the optics somewhat. But this is an existential conflict now for Qatar and the UAE and Bahrain and Kuwait in particular. Saudi Arabia is different. It's a large country, although much of it's uninhabitable, population tens of millions of people. Qatar and the UAE are, they're not, without being rude, they're not real countries. These are places where, the guest workers, the migrant workers, they're massively outnumber the domestic host population. They're not really countries. And I think those places recognize they've had a really nice couple of decades. They don't want to waste it. There's a day after this conflict ends, and they don't want to be on completely negative terms with Tehran, whoever's in charge. They don't want long-lasting enmity with Tehran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decades from now. And like I say, so far they've been quite transactional, calculating actors, which is precisely why they were oblivious. They were blindsided by the ideological investment by the White House in Zionism and its capture by the Israel lobby.
Yeah, I mean, there have been reports that MBS, obviously the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, had been lobbying America to hit Iran as hard as possible. I had Anel Shalin on the show on Monday, former US State Department official, who said that she thinks that might be sort of troublemaking by the Israelis, sort of trying to put that out there to spread the blame. I mean, from my perspective, if the Gulf states were being rational here, they would not strike back against Iran, and they would say, the biggest sort of card we have is the oil market. Yes, Donald Trump might be acting crazy today, but if some of the more sensible people around him start saying, if the oil price continues to go up, you will lose the midterms, then maybe that will sort of force his hand and he will have to bring back some kind of stability to the region. So I would guess that they still think that is their strongest card to play, not getting involved in the war directly on, as you say, I mean, the idea that their air forces would shift the dial is nonsense.
And they're not real air forces. Iran has inferior capabilities to the UAE or Saudi Arabia. It doesn't even have an air force. I mean, I think they had F-6s, which were retired by the US Navy in the 1980s. They had, like I said a few weeks ago, these are antiques. These should be in a museum. They were part of the Iranian Air Force. They don't really have an air force. That's why they had such a literal investment in ballistic missiles. But these countries, realistically, can they service these machines? Can they maintain them outside of US support with supply chains for more than a few months? Almost certainly not. And again, I think you're right. The world is now realizing that US empire is irrevocably changed after Trump Mark II. That's absolutely the case. But still, if you're in Riyadh or Doha or Manama, you're probably thinking, you know what, there's only 2 more years of this guy. Okay, JD Vance and Rubio maybe aren't, they're not Mitt Romney, they're not John McCain, but they're a lot more normal than this dude. If we can just, keep our powder dry and see it out, we might still have a future.
Because it doesn't matter if they're left wing or right wing, as long as they're not crazy.
Exactly. As long as they're plausibly rational actors. And the thing is, once you enter a total war of existence, which is what Iran thinks it's facing right now, and I think it's facing that, it's easy to start wars. It's very easy to withdraw or end them.
Not easy to withdraw or end them.
Sorry. This is my sleep deprivation, Michael. I'm so I'm trying to stay so informed about things. It's easy to start wars, and it's very difficult to end them.
Before we go, tomorrow night, if you're in London, we are putting on an event. It's called Dark Money. Kojo Karam, who we had on the show recently, he's brilliant, and Dalia Gabriel will be joined by expert guests to uncover how secret offshore billions are ruining Britain. Faiza Shaheen, Stephanie Brobby, Peter Gagan, and Hannah Spencer, Britain's newest MP, will all be there. It starts at 7:30 at Earth in Hackney. Tickets are available on Dice. NovaraLIVE events are always fantastic, always great energy. Lots of people to meet at the bar afterwards. So do get a ticket. Aaron, thank you for joining me this evening.
My pleasure. It's lovely weather out there, so why not go to Hackney tomorrow evening? Go to that event.
Absolutely. You can. I have to. Kingsland High Street on a sunny evening, delightful. So go there for the destination, if not for the speakers. Although you should go there for the speakers. Let's wrap up there. Thank you guys for watching. Come back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Unless you're on your way to the Earth Theatre in Hackney. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.